Welcome.
Thank you.
Well, as was said, this is the largest conference that we've had, of the 9 that we've had. I remember the very first one, there's only about 40 people, and most of them were people from Michigan. And at some point along the way, over the years, we noticed that the percentage had shifted. There was a tipping point where fewer people were from Michigan compared to everyone else, and that's definitely true now. And for us, that's a mark of success, not just the size, but also the fact that this spreads. People are from all over. I came from North Campus, about 10 minutes from here, so I didn't travel all that far to get here, but many of you did, and we're delighted that you're here. We thought it'd be fitting if I provided a bit of an overview of the center. This is new news for many of you, old news for people who have been here with us before. So the very first conference was in 2001. And as time goes by, you think back and say that was almost 20 years ago that we can trace the beginning of this idea of positive organizational scholarship. And in 2002, we formed the Center for Positive Organizational Scholarship, which is now called the Center for Positive Organizations. There were 3 original faculty, the founders that you're going to hear from after I speak. Gretchen Spreitzer joined right after, and around that time, I heard a rumor. I heard a rumor that some of these people were showing some of my slides. Now, there's not a higher compliment than to have the people that you love and respect show your work. At that time, Rob Cross and I were figuring out how to map energy networks, and the diagrams were pretty interesting, and those were being shown. And so I was very curious and flattered. So I went and talked to the whole group, the 4 of them, and said, what's going on? And when they explained what they were trying to do, what they were trying to accomplish, I said, sign me up. So I was the first director of the center, and I'm the director again now. There's been other directors in between. And back then there was only the 5 of us, 1 staff, no resources, no space, no budget, no money, just a huge amount of enthusiasm and some wild and crazy ideas that we thought would be revolutionary, that would be helpful, that would be useful, had a chance of maybe changing people's lives. So our mission now is to inspire and enable leaders to build high-performing organizations that bring out the best in people. We're catalysts for the creation and growth of positive organizations. Now, that's a very high aspiration, and I'll review with you a little bit of what we do, or at least what we hope to do, to accomplish that mission with research, teaching, and practice. So today, the reason the center really works is because of a professional staff that we have. We have a full-time managing director, Esther Kite, who is right here. Chris White, where are you? Chris White was our director for over 7 years, that he saw and led the growth of the center over that period of time. And Esther is now our managing director. We have 5 staff members. Actually, if you would all raise your hand, please. All of our staff members that are here, all right, to acknowledge you for being a part of this and for really making the center run on a day-to-day basis. We now have 11 core faculty. We grew from 5 to 11 core faculty, 32 faculty associates. Those are faculty at other departments here at the Ross School of Business. We have 14 faculty affiliates. Those are people at other parts of our university that are also affiliated with our center. And we have a global community of scholars that you are all a part of, with over 500 at the last count and growing, all members of that global community of people who are interested in positive organizational scholarship. We also have an executives in residence program. We currently have 5 executives. They're all accomplished executives who have retired and then have wanted to give back. And so they've joined our center, and they work closely with our students. They advise us. I see David Drews is here as one of them. I think, David, I saw you on the list for sure, and anyone else? Okay. All right, so if you have a chance to meet David, he can tell you a little bit more about our executives in residence program and how helpful that is in the center. And we have a consortium of organizations, various organizations and companies, over 50 now and growing. They're large, small companies in a variety of industries, and they're all interested in positive organizational scholarship. How do you transform organizations? And they come together as a community of like-minded people to learn from one another and to learn from us. So today we have touched hundreds and thousands of students, as you have as well, in the teaching that you do. So just a couple of highlights. We have a program called the Plus Lab. It's a co-curricular program. The Plus Lab has students who come, it's very selective to get into, who come every Friday afternoon for various sessions. It's just a wonderful experience for them. They're exposed to a wide variety of people and ideas having to do with positive organizational scholarship. Magnify is a spring course that we offer here at the university. Very intensive course on POS that includes working with a sponsoring organization or company. And POS courses now exist in all of our degree programs here at the University of Michigan at the Ross School of Business. And we also have an executive education program. In fact, in 2 weeks we have the next offering of that. It's a 5-day program where people come from all over who are leading organizations and want to learn more about how to be positive leaders. And then, as many of you know, we have lots of cases and tools and simulations, and if you haven't been to our website yet, I really invite you to do that because you'll find a lot of stuff that is really helpful and useful in the classroom and in research. So when it comes to research, we have a bi-weekly research incubator, and it truly is an incubator. Ideas are very, very preliminary. It's a hospitable environment, and where people can come in to present their ideas, get really good feedback on those ideas. We have this biennial POS Research Conference. This is the largest one, grew from that little kernel way back then. And tomorrow you're going to learn who the winner is of our outstanding published article in POS, as well as several honorable mentions that will be announced. And finally, we have a research advisory board. And I'd like to acknowledge our outgoing members, Barb Fredrickson, Scott Sonnenschein, Adam Grant, and Amy Resneski. And we have incoming members who I'd like to announce as well. It's grown. We now have 8. We went from 4 to 8. We have Arnie Carlson, Stephanie Creary, Brianna Kaza, and Teresa Glum. We're also joined by Chris Myers, one of our graduates, A. Simpson, Mandy O'Neill, and J.P. Stevens, again, another of our graduates. And I would like to end by acknowledging and thanking the organizers of this conference and all the staff that helped them. I know it takes a lot of work, a lot of things go on behind the scenes, and really a heartfelt appreciation of all the work that you have done.
Thank you so much for introducing the center on behalf of it. Of the CPO and the POS as a field of science. So they will engage in a panel discussion moderated by Gretchen Spreitzer, Keith E. and Valerie J. Alessi Professor of Business Administration, Professor of Management and Organizations here at the University of Michigan, also a previous faculty director of the center. So please join me in welcoming Gretchen to the stage.
Thank you.
Great to have you all here. So looking forward to this all year long. I am excited to introduce 3 people who need no introduction. Our 3 co-founders of the Center for Positive Organizations who in the very recent past have all become emeriti faculty. Now, what's interesting is that means it's by no means they're retiring. They are doing all the things they've loved to do for so long, teaching, writing, mentoring, being here with us today. And so they're wonderful models of what transitioning can really mean. I think the other thing that I just love about the 3 of them is that they really practice what they preach. They're caring people. So much of their focus is on lifting other people up. They are entrepreneurial, curious, always looking and being open to the next new thing, entrepreneurial in their focus. And they also really care about excellence. So while they're lifting people up, they're also setting really high expectations about what is possible. And I think that's why we've all been drawn to the work that the 3 of you started. Now, I said they need no introduction, but what I would like to do, you've probably heard that it's quite a popular thing in work organizations today to give creative job titles. So I've created a job title for each of the 3, and afterward we'll get you each a lanyard. So in addition to your name tag, you can have your job title on it. And I tried not to be too creative, but to really capture what I think is maybe the essence of each of them. Now, what's interesting as I was looking at these job titles this morning, I was thinking, actually, they could actually go with each of them, but I think I've got the right one for each person. So in a minute, I'm going to ask the three of them to come up to receive their new business card. And I'll ask them to come up here. So until I introduce all three of you, please stay in your seats. So first, in terms of alphabetical order, is Kim Cameron. You know Kim as a guru around positive leadership and forgiveness, especially in difficult contexts like downsizing. The other thing about Kim, and the reason that I've given him this new job title, is that he's really a keeper of our culture. So when any kind of setting, whether it's a department meeting or a censor meeting, he's very good about going back and reminding us about the values and the things that we did from the very beginning about what's important. So Kim, you are a chief culture keeper.
Fantastic.
That is your new title.
Fantastic.
Jane, so we know you're about compassion and high quality connections and positive identity. And I think there's no better new job title for you than Chief Matchmaker. I think you'll see that in action today, where Jane will be making introductions and collaborations will come out of those. In fact, the person I did my high quality connection with a few minutes ago, I said, well, how did you come to be here this year? He said, well, Jane Dutton came and gave a talk at my school, and I got really excited about POS. I'm like, that's Jane, Matchmaker. And then last but not least, Bob Quinn, who is also my mentor from way back as a brand new doctoral student. Bob is obviously a guru of transformational leadership, and most recently around the topic of purpose, whether it's individual purpose or organizational purpose, with a brand new book coming out, right? When is the date?
August.
When?
August.
August. So get your pre-order in right now. Bob's brand new job title is Chief Positive Deviant, and you know that's so true. So with that, please come up and get your new business cards and join us up here. Let's give them a warm welcome. Jane.
Thank you.
Kim, and Bob.
Thank you.
Thank you. Come on over and have a seat. All right. So, as we were brainstorming about how to kick off the conference, actually we've got bookend panels. Today it's about the founding. Tomorrow, late afternoon, it's about the future of POS, and we'll actually segue on that a little bit. But we thought it would be fun to think about the 4 Ps of positive organizational scholarship and give the 3 of them a chance in their own words to help us think about those 3 Ps. And I think you'll see their styles and personalities come out as you hear the way they answer each of the questions. I've asked them to keep their remarks on each question to around 3 minutes. I won't be up here, time, but we'll try to keep the pace going so that we can get through all of them. And the first question, the first P that we're asking them to talk about is, what is that purpose of POS today? How does it play out? And I think it's very relevant for us as we're gathering this morning. So I'll ask Kim to kick us off on that question first.
Terrific. So I have downloaded my brain onto PowerPoint slides. That's well known. If you ask me a question without that slide, I have no idea how to answer the question. So I created a slide. And my particular interests and its aspiration for POS as a field is twofold. One has to do with leadership. And I really love the quotation, which I borrowed from the 6th President of the United States. So it was in the early 1800s, not mine, which is, if your actions inspire others to dream more, learn more, do more, become more, that means you're a positive leader. And part of my aspiration for what POS is and what was created is to create circumstances where people in fact dream more, do more, learn more, become more. That is helping each other grow. The other one is, I encounter periodically, actually quite frequently, individuals who say something like, look, Cameron, I got profitability goals. I got shareholder price shareholder value I have to pay attention to. I got competitive dynamics, and frankly, I'm overwhelmed with the pressures of those kinds of demands. And it would be nice to pay attention to this positive stuff, but it's a little too soupy, syrupy, saccharine sweet for me. I don't have time. When I get time, I'll pay attention. So I think we have an obligation in those circumstances to reinforce what I think we already know, and that is because there is rigorous, I've got on this slide, systematic theory-based investigations which show that what we do actually pays off in organizations. Profitability, productivity, quality, those kinds of things go up. And the recommendations that we make and the prescriptions need to be grounded in scientific literature, because this is a field so easily taken over by motivational speakers and self-help gurus and airport bookstore advice. So I think we're the ones who need to keep it grounded and practical. That's what I would say.
Great, thank you.
Okay, so I'm sorry, I just had cataract surgery, so I'm trying to figure out these new glasses.
They look great.
Yeah, I do, thank you, but I can't see them. So I can't see them, so I'm going to be back and forth. Anyway, this is so fun to be on. It's so fun to have all of you here. Thank you for coming to Ann Arbor, and it's so fun to be bookended by these two guys, because I feel like we've been, just lots of amazing times together trying to hash these ideas out. I actually have a slightly different take, no surprise, than Kim and I'm sure Bob, about the purpose of POS today. And I am first and foremost an organizational researcher. I think of myself very much as an organizational scholar, neither micro, no macro, no meso. I just love organizations. And I think the field of organizational studies needs to expand its imagination as a community of what difference we can make in the world. So for me, what the purpose of POS right now is to elevate and expand our imagination as organizational scholars, both in the questions that we ask, but also in the solution set that we offer, but also ways of being with other practitioners in governments as well as business organizations about how basically to help us get out of the trouble we're in. So I think our purpose is, on one hand, is to expand imagination, at the other hand is to keep very vigilant about the very difficult problems that we face, and that our current solution set is simply not working. The second thing that I think is the purpose is really about enlivening scholars. So for me, this community has been a kind of holding environment that has held me, and I think it's held other people in ways that has made us braver, at least for me, made me more courageous, braver, more open, more willing to take on tough issues, and more willing to collaborate. So I hope you'll see in this gathering kind of, in some ways, us trying to practice as a community what we're preaching about cultivating conditions for human flourishing, so that we are in a state of optimal functioning, so that, again, together, whatever we're trying to do in the world, we're trying to do it better, and we're trying to do it braver. The third thing I just wanted to mention is that I think that the purpose of POS today is to reinfuse the study and understanding of organizations with more humanity. And I cannot think of, in some sense, a time where that is more needed. And I know there's other wonderful groups, other movements afoot that are part and connected to this one that are doing the same thing. But I just see such a need for us to recognize and work with each other's humanity as a community, but also to more fully embrace the humanity and write about and think about and try to help the humanity in work organizations. So I'll stop there.
I just changed mine. As always, inspired by my two colleagues, but one word in particular inspires me, and that's when Jane said better and braver. Positive organization scholarship's a scientific endeavor, so at the base you'd say it's about creating knowledge, which would be the same for every other area. So what differentiates us in that process? And I think it's about looking at what I call the far side of the curve, the right side of the normal curve. We know a lot about the middle of the curve, what's conventional. In social science, so hundreds of thousands of studies have demonstrated that for us. We know a lot about problems. In fact, we could say management is problem solving, getting tasks done, solving problems. At the far right side of the curve is emergent patterns. And when we talk about virtues and we talk about all the kinds of things that they just mentioned, we're moving away from what is. So when Jane talks about imagination, I really resonate with that, also a way of being. But I think that's something we study, but it's also something we have to become. So when I look at that word braver, I had breakfast with 2 doctoral students this morning. We talked about their dissertation. And the dissertations were going in very predictable ways that our conventional methodologies and theories would take us. Immediately I began to raise the question of what if? What if you made this a little bigger, a little braver? That conversation turned exciting. Possibility, imagination began to emerge. When we're in executive education classrooms, those are terrified people. They have big titles, they're making a lot of money, and they're afraid to deviate from the norm. And it's about creating imagination and bravery in order to do the mores that Kim tacked on there. So I think this is a very unique field. It deviates from other fields, and it's about virtues like courage and many other virtues. And it's therefore exciting, it's imaginative, it opens our life, and I love the notion of a state of being. I think POS researchers should be on fire all the time. And if we're not, we're probably drifting away from what I think it's really about. So that'd be my 2 cents.
So you can see how generative it is, just the approaches the 3 take. They come from kind of different starting points and different ways of thinking and being. And, you know, Kim has slides that he created ahead of time. Jane's got amazing notes that she's adding to, and Bob's creating in the moment. So you can see why they work so well together. So our second P is about progress. And again, only about 3 or 4 minutes each.
How long did we take that time?
You guys did great. You guys did great.
Did we?
Yep,
Okay.
you were just about at the 4 minutes, so good job. I hate to give too much encouragement.
I understand.
But this is over the last 18 years. You don't have to, you know, track every year. That's fine. But what do you think is the most significant progress that we've made? Now, ask Jane to get us started.
Oh.
This time, we'll just
Okay.
this time have a
So-
different person start us.
Great.
Well, okay. I think I'm actually really excited about the research, and about the research part. I'm really excited about the research that's going to be presented here. I think there's, you know, been a lot of progress around really important kind of core topics in organizational studies, and Wayne mentioned the network work that he did on energy networks, and I think, you know, that there's been a wonderful work being done in the area of networks, in the area of culture, job meeting, design, identity. Motivation theory has been expanded through more of a focus on pro-social motivation, institutional work. I mean, there's been a positive take on institutional work. So I think there's sort of older, more established organizational study topics which we've made real progress. But I also think, you know, there's thriving areas of new, relatively newer research, psychological capital, strengths research, especially outside the United States. It's just extraordinary. I mean, I was on a panel last year at the Academy, and I couldn't believe the amount of empirical work that's been done in that area. Hope, courage, compassion, generosity. I mean, go on and on and on about all sort of new, relatively newer areas that I feel like we made real progress. I think we've recovered some lost ideas that were were part of the founding of our field so long ago, like the ideas of growing, the ideas of humanization, becoming, those are all sort of historically important projects, or topics, but they hadn't really been center staged. I'm really excited about some of the core mechanisms of human flourishing, and I'm just going to do a shout out for a forthcoming, I guess it's out electronically but not out, in paper and by my wonderful colleagues, Gretchen, Dave, Shirley, Chris Myers. Am I getting everybody? They have a wonderful review article coming out where they talk about these 3 core mechanisms of human, that a positive perspective has center staged: resource unlocking, capacity creating, and strength building. And those are sort of 3 ways of looking at generative mechanisms that contribute to flourishing states at the individual and team levels. And I think that's an indication of real progress. It's an integrative perspective, so it's a shout out to that. Here comes my second shout out. I had the honor of reading, I think, the first textbook that's been done on positive organizational behavior, management as a force for good. Is Ace here? Yes, okay, Ace is one of the authors, and I'm not going to pronounce this right. Is it Pina Acuna? Is that the right way? Yeah, it's Pina Acuna, Rego, Simpson, and Clegg, and it is just a masterful textbook, and it's sort of this testimony to the body of work that's been generated in a very different perspective on our field of organizational studies. So I think there's such huge progress around teaching, and for somebody who taught the core OB class for 18 years and felt like it was a bit of a slog, there were some highlight moments, but it was a bit of a slog, and then being part of the sort of the reinvention of the core class from a more POS perspective and seeing the students really light up and resonate to that. I think there's been so much progress in sort of reinterpreting sort of core OB topics from a more positive lens that I think is much more useful to students, but also the invention of new electives. We have 5 POS electives here on campus, and one in entrepreneurship. There's positive communications, positive relationships, leading the good life, positive change. I mean, so there's just so much opportunity to do teaching that's deeply meaningful to students. And then as a teacher I can tell you from other teachers that I talk to who are teaching from this perspective too, it's a much more joyous way of being as a faculty member when you're teaching this kind of work and seeing the difference that it's making in students' lives. So I think we've made real progress in the teaching front as well. I probably went over 3 minutes. Okay, sorry.
It's high value, high value. So, Bob?
This morning, we were sitting there just chatting, and Jane made a spontaneous comment. She said, I think of all the things I've done, this is my greatest contribution. And I said, why? She was kind of stumped for a second, and she started thinking about it. She said, this is a living thing. It's bigger than we are. And I think that image is really important. When I think of this question, the first thing that pops into me is the roster for this conference. You look at this long list and you see such impressive people on that list. That's a living thing. It's a living community, part of a larger community of probably 500 people. And so we see this growing body of engaged researchers. 2 days ago, I was on a Zoom meeting with some people from California who have a company. And their company is about best self-management and creating cultures. And so they started to take me through their material, and I was expecting to be moderately impressed. Instead, I was greatly impressed. It was such mature thinking, and every piece was based on some scientific base, and yet it was practice. It was a company. That's part of that growth network that's just expanding that we don't even know about in some cases. So I think that's huge. And then I go back to one of the examples of the roots of that. We held the first conference, and we were designing it, and one of the things that we proposed was at the end of the conference, we would put people at tables with a sign up on some topic that was general, and people would gather to the tables of interest. And then we gave them an assignment. The assignment was, you each have 2 minutes to tell everybody else at the table what your greatest research passion is. So they did that. And when they're finished, we said, you now have 50 minutes to design a proposal for a symposium at the Academy of Management. And a lot of people thought that wasn't possible.
Me.
And the interesting, there's always a negative person in every group. The interesting thing was that the next summer at the Academy, the program was filled with symposia on positive organization scholarship. And they came out of nowhere, and it was one of the major first steps. But that was an organic thing. This whole thing is organic. So go back to Jane's sentence. It's so much bigger than we are. It's a living thing. And to me, it's amazing to look at those 18 years.
Thank you.
So I get a slide. So when I think about the progress over 18 years, I just decided to write down in a bubble form what's been created structurally. I got 2 slides, by the way. One of them, and by the way, I prepare more for one class than Bob does for an entire semester. I mean, he walks in, tells stories. People are on the edge of their seat and they're sitting here bored and sleepy when I do it. But that's the difference in our style, but we're such good friends. So not only faculty, but there are lots of kinds of faculty. I mean, the core faculty, Wayne's talked about this a bit in his introduction. We have affiliate faculty, we have associates, and we have, I can't read that. What does that say on the left?
Don't ask me, I can't see.
Community of scholars.
Community of scholars, of course. 520 people, self-identified positive organizations scholars. It's wonderful. Incredible staff. I mean, I got a memo this morning from Angie at 5:20 a.m. and we were communicating at 11:30 last night, so I don't think she slept at all, but that's that kind of staff we have. On the upper right, executives and residents, we have this half a dozen or so people who are among the most famous people in their industries and who have, in some cases, retired, in some cases not, who simply say, I want to get involved in this stuff. It matters a lot. I mean, who would have thought that 15 years ago, that we would have that kind of thing? Consortium members, 53. When Esther said, we're going to have a consortium and we think we're going to get a half a dozen companies, I thought, well, good luck. You may get 2 or 3. And then she said, we're going to have as many as 12. I mean, we have 53 companies who are committed and dedicated. POS fellows, that's essentially the Plus Lab. There are students. There are, I don't know how many, 100 students a year or more apply to be a POS fellow. They come and they spend, I don't know how many hours, but many hours per week, undergraduates and graduate students. No pay, no credit, but they're just immersed and they're doing all kinds of interesting things. I mean, how in the world could you predict that? And then there's a whole alumni group, the Magnify program that Jane created, 6 weeks, every day, all day. And we got the head swimming and diving coach sends his swimmers over here because it matters to athletes. And then these courses Jane mentioned, the conference we talked about, and then we have a whole group of people who have self-organized into practitioners. So that's, I mean, who would have expected when we started out with no budget and no money and no ideas, and we don't even know how to manage anything, and it's just been wonderful. And then the second slide is Ryan back there. Oh, this one.
Me, yep.
There have been some there's been some productivity that's occurred over the last 18 years. These are books, and it doesn't count the number of articles, but there has been some impact. I'll show up someplace in the world and they say, oh yeah, I read so-and-so's book. And so it's been relatively fruitful kind of progress in the last 18 years.
Great, thank you so much. So it's one thing to talk about progress, right? It's another thing to talk about, well, where are the gaps, right? So sometimes we get criticized as a movement of focusing too much on the, what's going right. And of course that gives us a lot of momentum. But as I was having breakfast this morning with Mark Levine and Arna, not sure where he is, in the audience, and we were talking about this special issue on teaching that we are creating that's merging the critical perspective and the POS perspective. I think that's a good entree, and by the way, we'd love to talk with you if you have some things you think might be good to be part of that. But I think it's part of this third question of, so what are the puzzles? What are some of the things we really need to grapple with as we move forward into this third decade of this movement? What are some of the most significant issues that maybe we've ignored or maybe that have emerged over time that we really need to wrestle with? And I'm going to ask Bob to get us started with on this.
Well, I think the word bridging is a nice entry point, that from, at least from my point of view on this question. I believe that POS, the positive lens, is inherently inclusive. And by that, I mean it integrates differentiation, and it includes things that we would normally differentiate just using our left brain. So for example, I think positivity includes negativity. I don't think you can have the one without the other. And the ability to see both is a much bigger challenge than it sounds. When I'm teaching this stuff, I often put up a list of conventional assumptions. Individuals are rational actors, and they're self-interested. Resources are scarce, conflicts inevitable, learning is hindered, communication is filtered. Well, those are pretty negative, but they represent what social science has found. And when I put them up, people tend to recoil. They say, oh, that's negative. And I then spend a few minutes showing them that actually that's what they believe. That's what I believe. That's what you believe. You locked the door before you left the house to come here. We live by transactional assumptions, and we enact them all the time, and they're ubiquitous. If you then put up a set of assumptions representing POS, people transcend self-interest, resources can be created, so on and so forth. It's a radically different list. It's the opposite list. As soon as people look at those two lists, they begin to analyze which one's right, which one do I believe in, which one, and the word underneath all those questions is the word or. They're differentiating those two lists. My point with the executives constantly, and it shocks them every time I say this, is here's the middle of the curve and here's management. Management's about problem solving, restoring, maintaining equilibrium. Here's this list on the right side of the curve, which is about social excellence. It looks very different than this reality in the middle of the curve. Now here's the key point. When you go through the transformative process of embracing the reality at the right side of the curve and you begin to see it, you lose nothing. You do not lose your command of all those conventional assumptions. You don't lose the middle of the curve. You don't lose the ability to problem solve. You are simply adding something. When you add the POS perspective, you are now seeing all of reality. You see problems, you see order, and you see emergence. And I think the big puzzle is, number one, how do we, as researchers, maintain that stance? Two, how do we help people out there grab that stance? Inclusion is such an in word these days, right? But I don't think people even think about inclusion in the way we're talking about it right now. It's not about gender, it's not about race. It's about the capacity to integrate differentiated ideas. And That's a real challenge. And I find even in our conversations over the last 18 years, we'd slip, these two never stop fighting about profit. You know? And the ability to integrate those things is, I think, what's underneath everything that we do. But we don't necessarily see it. So.
Thank you. Tim?
So puzzles for me, there's a slide, Ryan. Oh,
Not doing
Gretchen.
my job here.
Aha, thanks. So I got immersed for a couple of years in trying to address the published criticisms of this field in the field of positive psychology. And there are a number of legitimate criticisms, and they're puzzles, because how do we address these? One has to do with research. People have said we're overstating things. There's really no overarching theory that explains all this stuff. Cultural issues, all you're doing is superimposing a Western bias on the rest of the world. You're not dealing with poverty, inequality, injustice, and the difficult things that really capture our attention. It's too narrow, it's simplistic. You're manipulating people. All you're doing is trying to make people happy so they work harder, so you can get rich. You know, practice, this is a narrow set of very common sense prescriptions. Any charlatan could come up with the same list. And frankly, the validity police have not yet torn you apart, but they will. The validity police means we always introduce some framework, everybody gets excited about it, then the validity police begin chinking away at, oh, that's not exactly legitimate, that's not exactly legitimate, and pretty soon you've just torn the whole thing apart. The field, my doctoral dissertation was on the topic of organizational effectiveness, especially with colleges and universities. How do you determine if a college is effective? That concept has been destroyed by the validity police. There's actually an academic article by my friend Paul Hirsch that talked about that whole process by which that concept was removed from scholarship. Well, that potentially is an issue for us. The most personal issues, I've already mentioned this, for me, the puzzles are making the business case. I spent yesterday with 150 people in Michigan Medicine, it's the health system here. They've got a whole bunch of lives to save, and the question is this relevant at all? And I think we have to address that very carefully and very specifically, because I think we can honestly and with some impact. That's an important, where do we go from here? And the other one is, I get asked over and over and over again, okay, I think I'm convinced, Cameron, that this stuff is worth paying attention to. What can I do about it back home? So practices, without losing a research base, we need to be very helpful. And Jane and Bob have both talked about that. We need to be helpful in helping practice and individual lives change for the better.
Thank you.
Okay, I have a slightly different angle than my colleagues. Kind of no surprise. So I was thinking of it more as a organizational researcher, like or scientist, and thinking about, again, if I were teaching a doctoral course on positive organizational studies or positive organization, whatever you want to call it, what puzzles have we not solved? And I think there's a really important set of questions that come from if I think about how macro OT, how org theory is taught here, and I think about what topics are covered. There's so many important ideas in macro and more the macro side that aren't yet being used. And so, for example, what are the founding conditions of an organization or a group that would set a trajectory, a kind of path dependence towards flourishing? Or how could we more fruitfully use theories of emergence or ideas of emergence to imagine differently different forms of generativity or flourishing in human groups? I think there's such great questions that, again, at the more micro level, we can't answer. So I want to tap more of I would like to see us tap more of the macro theories and concepts to more deeply understand flourishing. Similarly, so for me, if you ask what POS is, to me it's about trying to understand the conditions for individual or collective flourishing, where flourishing is defined as a state of optimal functioning. Now I say that and it sounds a lot of gibberish, but a puzzle for me is sort of what does flourishing look like at these different levels of analysis? What would a flourishing team look like? How could I really capture that? What is a flourishing individual? I have a little bit more sort of understanding of that, but what is a flourishing organization? I know there's some researchers wrestling with that, but I'd like to see more. Another puzzle is how do we scale the micro enablers of human flourishing? And that gets to, I think that's a more practical question. But the question of scaling is I think, one that's really important. And I want to be sure to mention this because I did have a former life as a strategy professor for my first 7 or 8 years. And so the idea of capabilities, firm level capabilities, or particularly dynamic capabilities, I think is such an important idea. And I wonder, again, if that right now POS is not intersecting very much with strategy conversations at all. And I think there's this real opportunity and a puzzle about what do strengths look like at the collective level, and how could we learn from strategy researchers about what we know about dynamic capabilities and connect it to the kinds of collective strengths that we think are so important for human flourishing at the individual or the collective level. And then the final thing I'll mention, which I think the special issue that my colleagues are putting out on teaching is encouraging this, as well as, again, the great textbook that I just pushed, is, how do we welcome and engage more critical voices into the scholarly conversation about this? And again, I want to do a shout out for one of the chapters in that book, the textbook, about powering positivity, because and in that chapter they do this beautiful job of bringing the conversation about power and influence into the conversation about positivity dynamics, and they talk about power over, power to, power with, and power within. And it's, I think, again, a puzzle is sort of how do we fuse and integrate and make productive more conversations between what are currently somewhat disparate strands of thought.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Some really good ideas there that as you're at the conference today and thinking about new directions for your research, POS-related research, here's some really good ideas. And actually, that's a beautiful segue into our fourth question, our fourth P. So we've got purpose, progress, puzzles, and promise, points of progress. Maybe we have 5 Ps. Points of progress for our future. So what advice do you have for this group, for us as a community of scholars, about where we might get the most leverage as we move into
How are we doing on time?
We are doing beautifully.
Are we?
You guys, honestly, I've been, thinking I'm going to have to do some nudging. You guys are doing beautifully.
Great.
So Kim, I'll let you get started.
I keep getting reminded over and over and over again about how we started this. I had been doing research on downsizing, and I didn't have data, but I did have data on the finding that over time, organizations will deteriorate in performance when they downsize. Almost all, 80% of organizations will go south in terms of productivity and morale and ethics, all kinds of things, when they downsize. However, I didn't have data, but I had this impression that there was something about the few, 10 or 15% of organizations that flourished after downsizing. And I didn't really have data, but I thought I observed something. And the word that I used to describe what I thought I saw was virtuous practices. That is, there was compassion when people were harmed. There was forgiveness of difficulty and error. There was optimistic future. There was a high degree of ethical behavior and trust and trustworthiness, and so on. Well, the trouble is, back then, that was just not legitimate. You couldn't talk about the word virtuous, for heaven's sake, in scholarly, rigorous circumstances. So I had a chance to be, I had a chance to go be a dean someplace. And so I left Michigan, but just before I did, I gave a presentation at the Academy of Management meetings in which I made that case. And I thought, well, they'll laugh me off the stage. I'll be completely illegitimate. This will destroy my career. But it's okay. I'm going to be a dean. I don't have to come back here anymore. Somebody called me up 6 months later and said, I heard your talk, and one of the topics that you were talking about was the idea of forgiveness. Do you know about this foundation that's funding several $1 million worth of forgiveness research? I said, no, but I've never passed up an opportunity to get a research grant if there was opportunity to do that. So I applied, got a grant, but then I was a dean. You can't do research. I was hoping a doctoral student would take this on, and I would just kind of mentor them. But that was way too illegitimate. It was way too risky at the time. So 6 years later, I came back to Michigan. People would say, what are you doing research on now? And I'd start describing this. Their eyes would glass over, thinking, what in the world happened to you, Cameron? But at the time, Jane had created a compassion lab, which was just on fire with these doctoral students, and Jane, this incredibly positive person anyway. And we began talking, and then Bob and I have been close friends since we were 21 years old, and he's always done things on deep change and changes everybody's life and transforms the way you think and so on. We got together and we said, we have to learn from each other. How are we going to do that? Well, and by the way, there are 3 different versions of how we got created. Here's only one of the 3. We said the default option is to go do your own research. So if we're going to learn from each other, we got to do something. We created a center, and there's all kinds of stories about how we created a center. We're not supposed to have created a center, but we did. We had no money. Somebody gave us $1 million and then took it back because the development people didn't respond. And so the dean felt really guilty, so he gave us a secretary. We had a secretary and 3 of us who didn't know anything at all. And then Gretchen and Wayne showed up and started this thing to explode. Well, we didn't know what to call it. So it took us 6 months. I still remember, in fact, we were in a building that doesn't exist anymore, in the 6th floor in this little conference room. It took us 6 months to finally decide we were going to call it positive. We made sure organizational, because we're not psychologists, we're organization people. And then we fought quite a long time about the S, the scholarship part. And the reason we decided on that is because we said this has to be rigorous, empirical, theoretically based. Otherwise, it's going to be just self-help stuff, and it's going to be illegitimate. It'll be a fad. All right. Well, from that time on, this, I think, is the promise of the future. There are 520 people around the world who say, I'm a scholar, a positive organization scholar. I think it's so incredibly impressive. And the top row is the core faculty members, the bottom row is the associate faculty members. I mean, I can't imagine this not just exploding. So that's one. The second slide is, sorry, Gretchen, thank you. In another month or so, I'm going to be in Australia along with some of the people at the International Positive Psychology Association, IPA. International Positive Psychology Association has subsumed us. They assume that, well, we must have broken off from positive psychology. Turns out we existed a couple of years before we knew positive psychology existed. And I remember after a couple of years, we went over to Philadelphia and had breakfast with Marty in his house. And that's sort of when we discovered each other. But positive psychology has far more budget, lots more visibility, so we're under that umbrella, which is fine with me. But there's an entire division in IPA on work and organizations. And the only reason I put this up is we all should be we all should be members, because that's a growing international community. There are more than 50% of the people attending this year not from the U.S. And it's just it's a potential for our future. Now, that doesn't say anything about what we ought to be doing research on, but that's Jane's job and Bob's job.
All right, so good segue to you, Jane.
Yeah, I'm sort of changing along the way. So I think the promise of this is, again, each of us getting more in touch with our own humanity in this. And I think, I guess I want to encourage us to be with the suffering. And when I mean that, it's be with our own suffering as academics. I don't know if any of you are on Facebook with me. If you aren't on Facebook, you can get on Facebook with me. I am posting lots of things around mental health issues in academia and in universities. And, you know, as teachers and as faculty in these settings, we are in contact with so many students, and the rise in the level of depression and anxiety and other kinds of mental health challenges just, you know, quite terrifying, actually. That's in our classrooms. And recently there's also been a lens sort of turned on academia as an institution and how our working conditions in academia are creating so much suffering. And so part of the promise, I think, that comes from this, again, it's not just from the intellectual excitement of really, I think, really important and really interesting questions, but also the fact that, you know, that we're in trouble. We're in trouble, I really do believe, as trouble as academic institutions are in trouble. If we don't sort of recognize how our structures and processes are creating suffering, are contributing to suffering in students, and how our academic practices in some sense are creating suffering in you know, in not just people on tenure tracks, but people on non-tenure tracks that are participating in academic settings. I think that gives us a very grounded, close at home view of why understanding the conditions that just reducing the conditions that are creating these challenges is not enough. That what we really should be aspiring to is how do we put in place conditions that are going to, you know, foster us and everybody around us in academic institutions to be in a more flourishing state. Because again, in theory, academia should be the generator of, you know, really important ideas. And we should be in conversations with public policy makers and other kinds of key decision makers. But if we are all depleted and wilted in some sense and not at our optimal capacity, then I think the promise of not only the field of POS, but the promise of academia is actually quite limited. So I think it's important for us to be with the suffering. And I say this because now I've been teaching for a couple of years this course on flourishing at work. And until I was teaching this class, even though I've been an academic for 40 years, with those assignments that they're turning in the class, I had no sense of the level of pain of the students that I was teaching, that were in my classroom. And now that I can't look away anymore. And I can't look away, it's now that I'm in this semi-retired state and I'm in all these conversations with young junior faculty members and doctoral students in other kinds of places to the suffering that's existing already. And so I think we can do better. And I think that part of the promise of POS as a field is that we actually have the imagination and some solutions about how we could reinvent, you know, our practices in ways that would make us more generative as people who have so much influence on so many different people because of the privilege that we have of being teachers, you know, and researchers working in other communities. So I see huge promise, but it means looking to, not looking away from, the suffering that's around us in terms of ourselves as academics, but also the students whose lives we touch. So I think I'll just stop there.
Thank you.
I'm very moved by that, and I'd like to react to that before answering the question. There's a story I tell often. It came from a study we did of public school teachers. This school teacher was new, and she described her love of teaching, but then the challenge of doing it. And she said, I knew if I was going to be a good school teacher that I had to learn the unique needs and interests of every child. And so I did. And I was impressed and started to write that down. And she said, then I went to the next level. And my head shot up. And I said, next level? What do you mean next level? She said, well, then I discovered they're all the same. And I said, you just told me they were unique. She said, they are. And they're all the same. She said, no matter what they say or do, comma, no matter what they say or do, comma, every kid wants to learn. Every kid wants to succeed. Every kid wants to be loved. Every kid wants to be respected. When you break that code, then you can teach anybody, old, young, gifted, special ed, doesn't matter. Now that statement just blew me away. This was a 4th grade school teacher. We look down on school teachers. And she was saying to me, I have an unconditional theory of human influence. I can transform any group of people in a room because of this ability I have to see beyond what normal people see. The normal teachers, these kids don't want to learn. She was scaling empathy. To me, that was exhilarating because all my life I've tried to scale empathy and find it to be at the very heart of this suffering notion. Last week, I was giving a commencement address in Boston, and on Friday, a number of faculty members said, "Are you ready?" And I arbitrarily said, "Yeah, I'm ready." And I knew that I had I had enough content to talk for hours, but I knew I wasn't ready because I believe it's never about content. So I got up very early Saturday morning, and I took out a piece of paper and I made a list. The first word on there was students. Rich, poor, have a job, don't have a job yet. The list went on. And then parents, China, America, and then friends and spouses and children. And I just kept elaborating those categories and asking myself, what do they feel? And then when I finished all of that, I took the content and recrafted it to those needs. Now when I finished that piece, I was transformed. I was totally confident. I knew that commencement address would be a very high impact. There was no doubt in my mind because I now knew I was ready because I had scaled empathy. I was looking at the needs of the whole, and I had friends even though they were all strangers. And indeed, the talk was of high impact. That's about, very linked to that suffering notion. And it's also about my answer to the question, and that is going back to inclusion and integration differentiation, is constantly integrating the micro and the macro, going in both directions. So I think, for example, in the work I've been doing lately with an economist over the last 5 years, we have been to work on higher purpose of organizations and people to some extent. And that's involved a lot of mathematical modeling. It's involved interviews with CEOs. We wrote a paper for HBR. We've just finishing the book that we write. That's a lot of thought time, a lot of grinding on the data, right? Now, all through that, I had a feeling that I wasn't there yet. There was this critical thing to understand, and I didn't have it yet. And over the last few months, trying to write another paper, it started to crystallize, and I could see it. Ryan Quinn tells me time and time again that learning research says you learn from failure, not from success. Very conclusive. I'm convinced that we also learn from success. Now, that's a pretty radical stance to take when the whole field says it's not true. And I think it's because how we look at what we look at. And I went back and went into this data over and over again, and gradually it started to crystallize, looking at a few positive deviants. People experience in organizations social excellence. It emerges, often in crisis, usually in crisis, when we see enormous high collaboration, cooperation, accomplishment, etc. most people experience that, say that was a great experience, maybe even a sense of awe about the experience. And then they tuck it away because they have no apparatus up here to put it into. But we were able to find in several cases of people who had the experience and then couldn't let go of it. So they began to delve into it deeper and deeper. They were now learning from excellence, this minority. And as they did, all the three of them we feature, all of them did exactly the same thing. They came to a new question they could not have come to any other way. And the question was, if crisis produces excellence without leadership, can leadership produce excellence without crisis? That's a profound question. It turns everything upside down. A leader who asks that question immediately transforms the organization. But where did that question come from? It came from learning from excellence. So here's a macro process that comes down to a micro level, a discovery, that then goes back up to the creation of macro processes, and it can work the other way as well. As we were talking about those dissertations this morning, they were talking about pretty narrow, typical micro experiments that would have produced a dissertation. But I kept asking, what would that have to do with collective intelligence? Not intelligence, collective intelligence. Scaled empathy. Generalized reciprocity. When I read Wayne's stuff, it turns everything upside down. When you generalize reciprocity, the world is not the same. The transformation of peer pressure. Positive peer pressure. All of that is about seeing the dynamic whole. And so when I think about points of promise, it's about this word inclusion again, including suffering, including the negative, including profit, and bringing these opposites in our heads into and seeing the interactions, and therefore seeing things that people in other fields cannot see. This should be a room full of seers, radical people saying strange things because they see things no one else can see. And that gives you the power in your teaching to transform your students. So, and that's where I see the points of promise.
I can't even tell you what a wonderful start to the conference that you've provided us. As the co-founders of POS, you are the cornerstone for what has been created over these last almost 20 years now. And when I think about points of promise, I think about all of you that are here today. So if they're the cornerstone, you are the bricks that are now creating what our future will be. And so I am.
Can I say something about that at that point? Because what strikes me about, I have some advice for everybody in the room. And that is, if you go back to the image of that first conference when we put people at tables and said, all right, you got a few minutes to design a symposium for the Academy. I was looking at all the potential in this room. I'd invite you in every conversation you have in the next 2 days, as you listen to the other person and listen to what it is they care about in their research, to ask yourself, what's the interface? What could the two of us in this conversation do together in the future? And ask that of every conversation you have. I think that would be a very promising future.
So in just a moment, I'm going to turn it back to the conference organizers to introduce someone who has been a major supporter and is actually a faculty associate of our center. But I also want to say that the Ross School of Business, I think through their support, has allowed our center to flourish, has allowed this movement to flourish. And I'm not sure that this kind of cornerstone could have gotten started any other place. So we're deeply grateful for the support and the encouragement that we get here at Ross. But first, let's give a big thank you to our...
Thank you.
Nice job.